Hello to our few participants that are already in. We're just going to give everyone a couple minutes to get into our webinar, and we'll get started shortly. I think we'll just give it one more minute.
Wonderful seeing people sign in.
Yes. All right, so I think that we'll get started. Real quick, my name is Kristen Hoffman. I'm the director of the Autism Center at Misericordia, and thank you for our panelists and the participants that are signing in now. This webinar is going to be all about the IEP process and the different roles that people will play in that process, and to answer some questions from families. So we put out a survey to families asking what types of questions they would like to see the answers to help them with that process. So to start, I'm just going to have everyone introduce themselves and just say what role that they play in this process. So Wendy, do you want to start?
Sure. Thank you, Kristen. Thank you for having me. I'm Wendy Brown. I'm a collaborative advocate for students with disabilities. I have 20 years experience in special education as teacher, administrator, and IU consultant. A few years ago, I decided law school was the thing for me, and I did that. That was a fabulous experience, right? Dream come true, and now I am a professor at Marywood University, special education, and I also advocate for students, primarily students with behavioral needs, but not exclusively.
Great. And Jody.
I'm a board certified behavior analyst. I became board certified in 2006, but previously since college, I had worked in the special ed field of ABA, working as a one-on-one therapeutic staff support aide, and then going on to be a therapeutic staff specialist. I did my coursework and passed the BCBA in 2006, passed the exam, and worked for the Department of Education during that time for 2 years through the Pet and Autism Initiative, which is still alive and well throughout Pennsylvania. It goes into the schools and helps work on data collection and working one-on-one with the students and giving them specified IEP goals related to their disabilities and their needs. I opened my own clinic in 2014, and I began serving children throughout Carbon County, Monroe, Pike, Luzerne, Lackawanna counties, and we do clinic, in-home, and school-based ABA therapy.
That's great. And Drew.
Hi, thank you for having me. I've been practicing for 20 years. About the last 16, I've been only on the parent and student side. The first 4 years I practiced, I represented school districts only. before law school, I worked for the Department of Education as a consultant for a few years while I was getting my master's degree. And I greatly enjoy this side of the table. I have no regrets about having been on the defense side. I learned a lot, but I've been able to put my head in my pillow a little bit easier at night on this side.
Certainly understandable. And Lindsay.
Hello. First and foremost, I'm a mom to a 6-year-old autism, and we've just completed our first year, kind of, with COVID of kindergarten. So we've experienced IEPs from the early intervention side and then going into the school district. And I've been able to go to parent trainings, and we are kind of groomed to act in an IEP, and I was been fortunate to school district and now for the Autism Center of Misericordia. So to dive in and get some, surround myself with professionals to help me understand things, and every day I still learn something different. So it's just it's a big process. My son is only 6, so we have a long road ahead of us, and this is one of those things that everybody should just, unfortunately, we have to know them through and through. So this panel is exciting.
Absolutely, absolutely. Just a quick note before we start with our questions to all the attendees. If you do have any questions as we're speaking, you can add those questions into the chat box, and if we have time at the end, we will be able to answer those questions. All right, so first question, Lindsay, I'm going to start with you. So what was your first impression at your very first IEP meeting? Not only just the IEP, but how did that meeting feel, and how did that kind of work for you?
You're cutting out just a little bit, but the end of that, the very first IEP that I had was not the most scary because it was for early intervention, and I was very green, and any services that they were willing to give me, I was like, okay, thanks. Like, I don't know what I need. And so I didn't understand autism really. So it was really, I would take anything I would get. And then you start, talking among other parents, and you meet, at support groups, and or something comes up, and it's like, well, that's not his IEP. And it's like, well, wait a second. I thought we put everything in there. You put everything in there. So, okay. So now what do I do? It's like, well, you have to, take it upon yourself and do X, Y, and Z. Bad at all. And then when we got the transition to school from early intervention, that's when the sweat started. And it's like, well, what do I need? And it's just, when you are talking to other people in the field, they set you up for, you're just nervous, and you're ready to fight off the get-go. So I was trying to go for things with a positive experience, and it was the first IEP. It was like, okay, great, let's see how this goes. And then things quickly changed, and I was like, okay, I need to put these things in the IEP, and then realizing what goes in and what doesn't, and where things need to be, just takes a lot of time that a lot of parents don't have to figure these things out. I didn't really know any of the sections away. So it's been interesting, but if it's an early really was okay with anything that they would give me. And I've changed a little bit to where I'm like, well, let's change this, let's rephrase this. So it's been interesting, but a lot of work.
Yeah, good. Jody, the next question is for you. What role do you play in the IEP meeting?
When I'm brought into an IEP, it's for multiple reasons. There's a lot of clients that I work with that I'm the BCBA through their mental health service provider. So maybe I have invited to the IEP meeting to kind of let them know where we're coming from on the behavioral end and how much support we're able to provide and what assistance we're able to offer for the school. But the majority of my IEP meetings that I attend are part of due process hearings where maybe the parents had gone through a bunch of things prior to me being involved, and some school districts are on board with contracting a BCBA right away and saying, okay, let's get a BCBA in to do a functional behavior assessment, and we'll help put together a positive behavior support plan and train the teachers and staff. And other districts might already have an FBA in place, and they already might have a plan that they're following, and the parents are really pushing to get a BCBA involved. And then I'm put into the IEP that I could come in and do a functional behavior assessment and a positive behavior support plan. So when I do all those things, I do parent contact, I collect data within the classroom, work with the team members. We might talk to their teacher from last year, the client's teacher from last year, other individuals, the administration at the schools, and get all the detailed information before we write our plan. So we write the functional behavior assessment and determine what is causing the problem behaviors that are being seen in the classroom. And then we go from there to write the plan, and I do it in collaboration with the school district. So if I see a child who's exhibiting a problem behavior and function is escape, and I talk to the teacher and say, this is what I'd like you to do, I am aware that there are a lot of things that are difficult in public schools. So maybe they can't run escape extinction with the child in a public school classroom. So we need to talk about other options and other procedures that could be put in place before we write them into the plan. I don't just write a plan that is the ideal plan that maybe can't be done in the current environment. So I do very collaboratively with the district administration and the classroom teacher especially, so that we can get the same outcome, but in a way that can help a teacher who's trying to manage an entire.
Right. Great. All right, our next question is for you, Wendy. At what point would you say that families should consider contacting an advocate?
As soon as this session ends. I would say, like, as with everything with your children, follow your gut. If you hear that little voice, go with it. And because we do want to preserve the relationship between families and schools, sometimes that little. So if you can't use your gut, then go a little more objectively and take note. When you ask a question, are you getting an answer to that question, or are perhaps team members talking about other things? So follow your gut, find out if your questions are being answered, assess if you feel heard, because really that's what an advocate is going to try to advance for you, is that your concerns are being heard one way or the other. It's not enough to be heard. So I understand the trepidations, but I would say that if you're already thinking about an advocate, chances are you should at least speak to one. I don't know of anyone who wouldn't offer you a little bit of time on the phone or even face-to-face to help you determine yes or no, is it the time or not? And if you struggle with any decision, right, chance information. So get that information from an advocate or two or three, and decide, is this a time, or am I going to go maybe one more quarter, one more meeting by myself?
Yeah, that's great. Drew, I'm actually going to ask you the same question. When do you think that families should be contacting that attorney?
Well, to come through my door, there really has to be an emotional level where you're committed to picking a fight. And I would say that when you feel like you're begging and kicking and getting help, that's usually what gets you to my door. It's usually the last straw with the principal, even though the principal is not really a big part of any case I usually have. That's not, whatever you're mad about, the case is about, you have to come with a lot of records. Just a comment from two other panelists I'd like to address. Lindsay mentioned how confusing the process was. I've represented special ed teachers, I've represented special ed director, I've represented school psychologists, I've represented lawyers. That it doesn't matter if you're really kind of well educated in this and you do this sort of as a matter of practice as a teacher, or whether you're just trying to get by and figure out the basics. There comes a point when every parent sits across from me and they watch me do a record review, and I start piecing together a web of documents interrelate. And the majority of the parents at some point, I know it's coming, they break down, they just start crying, and they feel like they failed their kid, because what I'm piecing together, and I'm able to piece together because I do it every single day, and I've done it for 20 years every single day. And it's not, I always say the same thing to them. It's not reasonable for you to think that you, as a parent who's probably new to the special ed process, will be able to just somehow, out of instinct, understand this pretty difficult, complex web of laws and apply it to, and say, aha, I got you. And that's not the way to decide. First, Lindsay, I hear you loud and clear in how you kind of describe your feelings, because that's what I've seen.
Yeah.
And Wendy, I think that your view on the gut instinct is that, you know, a lot of times parents call me, and I, as you had said, Wendy, I have no problem giving free advice all day long. I'd rather people trust me, and then if and when they're ready for me, they'll come to me. But really, it's fair to, for the district's sake, for your sake, for your child's, I work with the districts, but there gets to be a point where you need more help. And that gut instinct is usually the right thing. It's probably not what the case is going to be based on, but it is probably a good thing to reach out to somebody when you're feeling overwhelmed or not heard, as Wendy had said.
Yeah, that's great. Wendy, I'm actually going to jump back to you because I feel like we're kind of dancing around this a little bit. How would you respond to families who are told that using an advocate is going to ruin that relationship between you and the school, the parent and the school?
So I've had this conversation, right, with more than a handful of parents. It's a legitimate concern. So again, you speak to advocates, get to know a little bit about what their approach would be, ask questions. For myself, I'm collaborative. I won't take the adversarial approach. If you want a hammer, that's not me. But I will help you with the process. I will help identify that it's sequential and not necessarily hierarchical, so everyone comes in with the thing they want to discuss, but we still need to take it a little more stepwise. So it is a legitimate concern. However, at a certain point, you are weighing the relationship against your child's needs being met. There is a way to have both. And I'm very concerned, right, about it's in civil law. There are only so many areas wherein the parties have to continue on in the relationship. School, special ed, that's one of them. We can't have a second grader be that kid and continue through school with the cloud over his head. So I'm very aware of that. But I wouldn't let that be the reason. If you speak to an advocate that you think, nope, this person to make more hay than it's worth, then yeah, then that's not your advocate. But it's with anything. You're choosing a provider. Make sure you feel aligned with the provider.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Thank you. Lindsay, this question is for you. Did you agree with pieces of the IEP, even if you did not fully understand what they meant or what the terminology was?
Absolutely did. And it's really, you're at a table and you're nervous, and there's all these papers printed on front and back, and they're just flipping through them, and they're talking really fast because they have to go over each thing with you. And it's like, if you agree, you know, it's like buying a house, you know, and it's like, wait, what? You know, I don't really know what that means. You know, oh, your kid isn't in second grade yet, so you don't have to take the passes. I'm like, what are the passes? Okay, I guess we don't have to take those. I don't know. You know, but, and just the terminology, it takes a really long time to get all those acronyms. You know, ABA therapy, I know. But for the longest time, you know, it's speech, all the, you know, that I had. And then FBAs, I couldn't remember that for the longest time. ADLs, I couldn't remember, you know, all these things. And it goes objectives and goals. How are they different from SDIs? What is an SDI? But you feel like feel very uneducated when you admit that you don't know what it means, and you're trying to present this front that you know what you're doing, and it's very humbling to just put your kid in somebody else's hands. But that's essentially what I had to do, and what I was afraid to stand up, say, I don't understand this, explain it to me. But it really, I did agree, and so did my husband. We had everybody who was around us, and that isn't, I mean, in the beginning, okay, you know, you're learning, but then that did change over time. So those acronyms are still hard to get sometimes, though.
Yeah, absolutely. It's tough, and it, you know, it changes from state to state too, so don't move.
Yeah.
Jody, the next question is for you. At what point do you suggest to a parent that something could be better with further assistance outside of and with an outside source?
So the cases that I'm brought into already are due to the parents having already gotten an advocate or gotten a special education lawyer. Those cases, I really don't have that kind of a role where I have to look into outside things or give the parents any kind of specific recommendations. But some of my clients that I work with through my company, where I'm the BCBA or just the supervisor on the, they're in schools, and the behavior technicians are coming in for supervision and saying, you know, so-and-so is in school today, and the parents really want the school to do this, but the school is not necessarily able to do that. And we're kind of caught in, we take the approach of contacting the school first, where we would say, you know, I know you're aware the parent is really interested in this, and you know, you might want to talk to administration or the director of special education. We might do an email to special education, letting them know some of the concerns that we're having therapeutically, and that obviously our job in the classrooms are not to be the spy. You know, we're not in there to spy for the parents. We're not there to report back to the parents, tell the parents what's going on. We're there to help the child. And in order, like Wendy said, in order to help the child, you have to be on good terms with the people that you're working with every day. So we might go to the teacher and give them an idea of what the parent wants. And if the teacher is unable to or unwilling to level, or like I said, the director of special education, and let them know that these are the things we're working on, and these are the things that the parents want, and maybe can we have a meeting? Can we get an IEP meeting together where we could all sit down and discuss these things? Because then once it's discussed in a meeting, that gets a lot more attention rather than just, you know, emails, phone calls. If you sit down and have a meeting, if you try to work it all out and you sit down and have a meeting, at that point is when the parents will usually say to me, well, I want you guys to do this in the classroom. And I might say, well, you should be speaking to the school about that because it's their domain and that's their house we're coming into. So if, you know, we can do so much as according to our treatment plan, but once we're in the classroom, we can't tell anyone what to do. We're not there as a guest. So we have to be able to work it that way where they're willing to do it. If they're not, then the parents' next move might be to, you know, try to get us to do it on our own. And that's when I say maybe you should contact someone who can help you with that, because if you're telling the school what you need, or if the school might have a recommendation that the parents don't want to follow, sometimes the school has, you know, information to support a reason for maybe a change in placement or a different IEP goal. Their job is to communicate as part of the IEP team. So everything is documented and recorded. And at no point do I say to parents, you know, go get an advocate. I might say, you know, you've tried all these different things. The only way that you can get me put into the IEP, or that you can get a teacher to do something that you need them to do, is get it put into the IEP. And if you've tried yourself, and if you've brought it to the meetings, and again, the IEP comes home and it's not in there, that's when they might need to contact someone else to help them to find the common ground, or what is going to work best for their child. And I kind of let everyone know I'm here for whatever. I will do whatever is ethically and data driven. I will do those things. But if I'm being asked to take sides or kind of report back and forth, that's not really my role at all.
Right. Makes sense. Drew, the next question is for you. Should a family contact their personal attorney first, or go straight to a special education law attorney?
Other lawyers getting involved in these kind of cases, I've really found there's only a few in Pennsylvania that do this. Usually I get a call from a stranger I don't know who's a lawyer, and they say, you know, I got your name from somebody. Can I send this name to you? Because I don't deal with this. And then usually I don't call the person directly. I don't want to solicit directly. If they want to make a first phone call to me, I say that to whatever lawyer it is that's calling me. I just say, here's my number, have them call me. So that's it. When a lawyer sort of dabbles in it, it can make it a little bit more difficult for me to jump in later. It happens pretty rarely, actually. But when you have somebody who's really, you know, a good personal injury lawyer, or handles, figure out who to even write a letter to. It's just it can set things off in a little bit of a wrong direction. My preference is just have somebody call me, or better yet, I'm gonna plug here. I going through my website, just writing a paragraph. You know, I get that all the time. That's the easiest way to respond. And I'd say probably more than half of the phone calls I get are just people having some kind of a question. It doesn't even involve, a representation agreement or even meeting. Usually I can give a little free advice if you're just sort of stuck. So it's really the easiest way to just kind of have that direct one-on-one relationship. And I would love just a minute to comment on something that Jody said about her practice, about not taking sides. I found out about Jody actually because a defense lawyer insisted on using her practice years ago to solve a pretty difficult case, and she did a great job. And she's been involved occasionally as a result of a number of my settlements. And I'd say that the way she described herself, I've also seen that historically. I, who on one hand really want to prove one side's point of view and disprove another side's point of view, it's actually great when you have a provider like Jody, and there's don't take a side, but they collect data, and then you can kind of figure out what to do logically, comparing it to the law, comparing it to what's actually in an IEP or an evaluation report. And it really helps the decision-making process from a legal point of view when you have straightforward and unbiased information. And I think she's done a great job with that. She mentioned that, and I don't think that point should be lost. That's actually pretty huge. Thank you.
Yeah. No, I'm glad that you commented on that, because it is really important, to really kind of prove that case too, that the data does need to be unbiased. And it's great that you do such a good job of making sure that happens. That really does help the families in the end. So
Right,
that's
it
great.
gives a true picture of what we're dealing with, because I've had calls to go in and do an FBA as part of a settlement agreement. And I've gone into the school and there's a child that is exhibiting zero problem behaviors. They're well adjusted, they're doing well, but the lack of trust is there. The parents don't trust that the teacher is telling them, oh, your child had a great day, he got all, stars on his behavior sheet or whatever. The parents don't trust that. They feel like he's struggling, we're missing something, he's not where he's supposed to be. So to go in and be able to write an FBA and say, guess what? There currently are no behaviors of concern. There are no behaviors that are impeding his education. And right now, my recommendations are what the teacher currently does. We take a detailed list of all the things the teacher is doing currently that's working. Because if we see the teacher from last year says, the child was out of his seat, they were not doing their work, whatever the case may be. But this year you have a child who's doing well, and the parent might think that the school is misreporting. So if we go in and our recommendations are whatever the teacher is doing, I'll sit with the teacher and say, what is it? Okay, what is it that you just did when you walked over to him? Okay, you gave, verbal praise and a promise reinforcer that later after lunch, he will get X, Y, or Z. So I put that all in my recommendations to say, yes, this year is going well. Historically, the student had these problem behaviors. This year, there are zero problem behaviors occurring. However, these are the things that are being done that are working. So let's keep doing that again next year.
Right. That's great. Lindsay, next question will be for you. How have things changed for you from the first IEP meeting until now? And maybe even commenting on what you plan to do better even at your next IEP meeting.
Right. Making the transition from a center-based program to a school program, I was expecting the same amount, if not from the school district, and it really isn't the same. And it took me a while to realize that that is not going to be the case. So then that's when I realized I had to rely so heavily on the IEP, because, that communication, I don't need to call every day to make sure somebody, wiped his nose. I didn't do that, but what I was able to do, what I was told is that if it's in the IEP, they have to follow it. So that's great. In the parental concerns, I typed away. I'm like, okay, it's in the IEP. I handled it. And then I realized when I got the IEP back, I'm like, these aren't, but we didn't really talk about this and it's not in there. Are we covering that? It's like, well, we listed it. I'm like, okay. So again, asking for clarification, anything that is just ask and ask and ask until you see it and it's in there. And personally, I let them know that I read every single line. My son takes a little bit more time to process. So we had a 3-second wait time. Very, very small line on page 45 of 57. So I said, I want to change that from 3 seconds to 5 to 8 seconds. And I just wanted, from my perspective, I wanted them to know that I was reading every single line so that I knew what was in there and that I'm very invested and involved, and one thing that I typically tried to do was I brought a picture with me of my son because he's not in the IEPs with me. And I think a lot of times they're files, they're binders full of information. So I made sure that it was tips and tricks from other parents and other me. Brought in donuts, I brought in a picture, and I was ready to go. And then this next time we're doing a Zoom meeting. I can't bring you donuts. I can't bring you fruit. But showing a picture like, this is who we're talking about. It's a human being. And just realizing that I can say, I don't like this, or, I don't care what we do, but we have to put this in here somewhere and make sure it's being covered. And let's figure out where we can put it in. And knowing that I have a stake in the team because it is an IEP team. And realizing it's not a hard line of us versus them. We need to work together. We're going to be together for a really long time. He's 6 years old. So just realizing that I can chill out a little bit and I don't have to be so nervous, and you can open up your IEP again anytime, it really helps. But knowing you can say no or insist that something goes in, again, from Jody's comment, they may not be able to do that. But does that mean they won't be able to do it next year too? Let's keep those things that we're trying to get, which would be best for our son or our child. We can keep them on the table and see how we can fit it in maybe at a later date. But some things may not be possible. Shoot for the moon.
Absolutely.
Comment on that. I feel that I love to think outside the box. I like to come up with strategies and plans. And when I do, I always think from the school perspective, because I'm there for the child. I want the child to succeed, but I know that if I make a plan too difficult or impossible to work, or, too many hands are in the pot and there are too many players, that they're not going to be able to execute it appropriately, and it's going to become a problem in the end. So there are so many different things that we've done with kids in schools that were unheard of before. Things like reinforcement all the time, availability of reinforcement. Some teachers don't know that it's okay if you need to pull your child that has special needs and is in your gen ed class, and that child needs to go into the back of the room and have 5 minutes on an iPad every once in a while for reinforcement, that's okay. And the other kids are not going to get jealous. Kids are great. Kids understand. It's really important to give past examples too of things that I've seen done, of things that I've worked on in districts where they thought maybe, it's not fair if he gets a Skittle when he finishes his math sheet because Johnny and Joey want Skittles too. But we were able to come up with plans to show that it's worked, it's effective, and it's going to make your life so much easier. Doing a little bit of reinforcement now pays off in the end so much more.
Yeah. Jody, I'm going to stick with you and ask you the next question. Do you ever offer to go through an IEP with parents if they have questions, to go through it line by line like Lindsay was talking?
Mm-hmm. So I don't have mastery of all the legal implications and legal things that are in the IEP. I have one main focus that I do look for, and that's the box. That's the line with the box that says, does your child exhibit behaviors that will impede his education or the education of others? And the first thing I do when a parent tells me of a problem that they're having with their child and they need a functional behavior assessment done, I say, is the box checked? And we look, and if the box is checked, then I say, please show me behavior support plan. And sometimes, that gets sticky because maybe I see a plan that was written and it's, very generic, or it's not well written, or, I'm a behavior analyst, so I'm a huge data nerd. I don't want to see that the function of the behavior is, a poor attitude or control, or just,
I do.
So, right. I don't want to see that, because then I am in the uncomfortable position of contacting the district and saying, hey, I was contacted by a client who wants me to do an FBA, and I'm aware that you already have one. However, in terms of behavior analysis, these are not really going to help a classroom teacher. Saying that the child does it to be in control and the teacher should use planned ignoring is definitely not making this child's day go any better, or the teacher's year go any better. So, I might offer to help in that manner, contacting the school and seeing if we can help with the plan. Parents often already have an advocate, or maybe they send me in and the school contracts me to come in and do an FBA. It's always important. I've actually unchecked 2 boxes this year where I've had clients over the past couple of years that have had these significant problem behaviors, and we've sat down at the meetings and said, the goals are all mastered. There are no other goals that I see. We could recheck the box later. We could do a new plan later, but for now, everything is working. Uncheck the box. You have a child who does not have behaviors that impede his education. So that's great. That's my goal, is to get there and to be able to have the schools feel ownership and proud about having been able to do that. I want my service to be a temporary service. I don't want to be with a child for life because they could never succeed in the classroom. I want to be able to help them. And sometimes the kid will have a great year and they'll work with the staff and it's a great year, but then they go to a new classroom and then they have difficulty. So maybe I come back and we input some new goals, do some more quick data and figure it out. But the best way to do it is that way. And in terms of going through the IEP line by line, I do have, my kids that have been with me, that I'm their BCBA through my agency, and the parents always give me their IEPs and I always look at them. And, if it's a classroom that I'm familiar with or a school district that I'm familiar with, I am very comfortable just before I even say anything to anyone, just emailing the director of special ed and saying, hey, I'm looking at this IEP and it says this, this, and this, and that's not really manageable, or that's not really what's able to happen right now for that child. So, do you think that maybe having a meeting would be good? Because right now the IEP is not reflecting what is actually happening that I'm seeing when I go into the schools. It's not that I just am trying to say schools are not following the IEP, we need to get a lawyer, no, sometimes the schools will say, what? I didn't know that the teacher and train them and show them how to do it. It's sometimes as simple as that.
Yeah, that's great. Wendy, next question's for you. What role do you play during the actual IEP meeting? Do you typically speak first, or do you wait for parents to ask for your assistance?
So Kristen, I'd like to answer that in a minute, but first I would like to just tag along with something Jody said.
Sure, absolutely.
So I had been board certified myself, and I had to kind of put that on the shelf when I went to law school because I was not serving students, I didn't have face time, et cetera, and you can't maintain your certification that way. However, it was kind of rule number one, that the most appropriate behavior plan is one that would be implemented with fidelity. So it wasn't about how sophisticated it was. So what Jody's saying, if you remember the 55 speed limit in the 70s, it's not just a good idea, it's the law. That's exactly this scenario, that it's not just it has to be. There's no way of writing a plan that exceeds the capacity of the people who will be implementing it. That would be the easiest thing to do, is just decide that you have to write something that will be implemented with fidelity. As simple as that may be. My role at the meeting, first off, there's been quite a bit of conversation before I'm even at the meeting. And so I don't swoop in, and that's probably not too strong a word, and take over. A parent can tell me, I want you to talk, or I want you to sit back. That's all known up front. I've also consulted and never gone to the meetings. So if people truly are afraid of what could happen if they bring an advocate, I'm able to point out, well, here, you may want to get some data in that part of the IEP because that's kind of important. It looks like you don't have any there. You can ask for that. You don't need me to come to do that if you don't want me there. Once there, collaborative, which means I see both sides and try to put the interests of both sides, which is a horrible term in and of itself, right? It's one team. Put the interests of all team members at the forefront for this child. Well, then I come right out with that. And I'll say, I'm here to help problem solve. So I have worked, when I was a teacher, I worked with advocates who were problem identifiers. That didn't take us very far. I'm there to problem solve. So it turns out school folks like that. They're also looking for a solution. Nobody argues with a solution, right? As long as it's meaningful and one that's accessible to the people at the table. So I don't usually have this question about who will be doing the talking, but I will say this. I don't speak about the student, that child. You're the expert on your child. I have expertise in many areas related to the IEP and of course the IEP process itself. I will speak on those things, but I have not assessed this child. In many cases, I haven't met because I'm not there to speak on behalf of that particular child, but more of the process in general. Right. The other thing I won't do, because People like that I worked in schools, but then I think sometimes it makes it perhaps a little bit uncomfortable. So I just promise I never speak to schools outside the earshot of the parent. So if it's an email, the parent's copied. I don't usually do phone calls unless I can get the parent in on it. So a parent would never have to wonder, did Wendy say so? No, Wendy said nothing. Anything I'm saying, you've heard me say. That's simple.
Makes sense. And Drew, what would you say are the most common issues that you see in all the school districts that you've worked with?
I've seen a few. Actually, one would even relate back a little bit to what Wendy and Jody had said about that role in as a third party and what it is. And one trend I do see is when there's a breakdown. I see after the fact, there had been a breakdown. There may have been a breakdown for a long, and an advocate or a third party is involved in some way, and I get 3, 4, 5, 6 IEPs developed, revised, new IEPs within a month of the first IEP, and there's all these sort of spit shine documents that the district was forced to accept and are mad about it. And sometimes I do think that you're, as a parent, you're trying to be collaborative, you're bringing people with you to help. And if now many times districts are helpful and will work with you, but when there is the occasion when you're getting stonewalled, I think that the line of how far do you push the district, I think that should be curtailed back quickly, because what you don't want to do is spit shine an IEP and have it look really good and everybody hates you, and then you bring it to me and all I have is maybe, if I'm lucky, a little bit of data collection showing it wasn't right. And sometimes if things really are going badly, the best thing to do is let the IEP organically develop how it would have developed naturally. And I think a good advocate or a good third party or a BCBA just trying to help out, it's hard to recognize when it is, because you really want to help a child. You really want to help somebody who's paying. But I think that's a really tricky thing in the moment when you feel like you're finally getting somewhere. It's hard to recognize a room full of people are mad and they're not going to implement it. And that's implementation cases are much harder to prove, or failure to implement cases are much harder to prove than failure to adequately develop an IEP in the first place. So that it's a very tricky role to go into an IEP meeting. So that is a trend that I've always seen early on, where when I see getting past 3 IEPs a year, you're getting to the 4, 7, 10 IEPs, and that is typically a much more difficult case for me than easier, believe it or not. As far as more generally issues that I'm seeing more in what my clientele is dealing with, 20 years ago when I started, and even before that when I was with PDE, there was no, I think at my first, I had 1 autism case 20 years ago. Now it's about half of my caseload, where there's a substantial amount of the similar kind of lack of programming issues for autism, but also with that, or with kids who have speech and language issues or just social developmental issues, bullying is also probably co-mixed with my other cases. About half of my cases, there's some kind of, where the child is the victim or the child is the bully and is not able to manage. Everyone looks at the kid as a bad guy, but really that's the kid who's not able to function. And it's easy to look like a bully when you're a victim, and you've got a herd of kids that feel like they need to protect themselves from you. And then the other trend that I've seen, of course, over the years has been, that kid who really is just struggling and is getting further and further behind academically. I mean, there's always occasional cases: blindness, intellectual disabilities, adaptive skill issues, transition. There's a gamut of stuff, but those are the big things pre-COVID. Post-COVID, I would say everything's a little bit slower now. It's kind of a weird time the last 3 months, but the issue that I've seen more recently is where you have a kid who's academically below grade level, maybe 4 or 5 years below grade level, and all of a sudden through telelearning or through the internet, they're expected to just, here's the general ed curriculum, get through it like all the other kids, and somehow they're just dropped. And it seems to be people, the autism case actually has less. I think parents are like, all right, we can deal with our kid at home, and we actually can manage the academics pretty well with all these distractions around us. And it's more the kids who are just, out of the blue, they're expected to read an 8th grade math problem, word problem, and they're at a 2nd or 3rd grade calculation skill level and a 2nd or 3rd grade reading level. And there's no remedial support. I see that most often, most recently.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, that's the end of my questions, but we do have one question from a participant. I'm going to read, and we can decide who's best to answer. What do you do for a child who has a few different diagnoses and is blanketed under one thing, and they don't put it in the IEP? For example, my daughter was diagnosed with sensory processing disorder, anxiety, and the doctor said it blanketed under the autism spectrum disorder, but in her IEP, they don't have that. Should it be there? Is it something that I should contact an advocate about because I am lost?
I can answer
Yes.
that.
Oh, go ahead, Drew.
Doesn't matter to me. Well, as far as the IEP is concerned, or the evaluation report is concerned, the district has a very separate lingo than medical doctors using the DSM. A lot of doctors will use this one list of disabilities, but educationally, you have to have a disability to get an IEP. That's one of the 2 steps. And there are only 13 categories of recognized disability under the special ed statute that gives IEPs. There's only 13. So I often have a parent call and say, has been diagnosed with dyslexia. Well, dyslexia is not one of the 13 categories of disability. ADHD is a medical category. It is not an educational category. And there's many examples. Autism is one category educationally. Autistic spectrum disorder is medical. Autism educationally is very broad. So I would say that in order to make sure that there's a sensory processing issue or there's a specific deficit in a reading subskill, I think that the important thing is get the kid in the right category educationally, and then look at the assessment results in the evaluation report, and look at what the standardized scores are for academics, and look at what the clinical behavioral scales are saying about need, and develop goals based on more of the raw data need, as opposed to my doctor says dyslexia. It's a wrong. I'd say it's a wrong fight to pick, and it's kind of one of those things. A parent comes to my door and they scream, I'm saying dyslexia, and they're saying learning disabilities, and it's usually when I say, come in and let me look at the records, because you may have a bigger fight there, but that's not necessarily the right one. That's my view on it. But I don't know. I think Wendy, you were going to jump into that question too. I don't want to. There's a panel with different points of view on it.
I would just echo that look at how this manifests, what needs are created because of those other areas, anxiety, sensory processing. I would say if a doctor has taken the time to call attention to it, put that into the IEP. Otherwise, things that don't get in, later down the road, someone says, seems awfully anxious. If I had to guess, and then someone says, well, actually, in 2nd or 1st grade, this child was diagnosed, but it just never carried over. Worth mentioning, again, once someone is declared eligible, mention that. If there's no needs, just keep carrying it forward, because someday it could show up in school. But if there aren't any specific educational needs right now, then I think including it is enough.
Okay, that's the end of our questions, and I don't see any other questions from other participants. I'm just going to give them just another second or two to type them in if they need to. You can type your questions either in the Q&A or the chat box.
While we're waiting,
Yes.
I did have a quick just comment. So what I've seen being able to work in a school as well as being a parent is parents get this horrible connotation. If they're calling and asking, you know, what are you doing? They're like, oh, this parent is crazy. You know, she's always up here. And I've gone up, like, where was my kid the first 2 weeks of school because you told me he wouldn't go in his classroom? So where was he? Like, where did he go? So I had to find things out. But then on the other end of that, doesn't come in. They're considered, oh, they don't even care. They don't even show up. You know, so no matter what you do, you're facing, you know, judgment when we get enough judgment anyway. You know, so I just feel like pick the right battles and just talk to other parents, because there may be something that you can't see because you're so emotionally involved. And then you're sleep deprived, maybe tired, you know, somebody hasn't eaten in 3 days or gone to the bathroom this week. You know, you just got to take a step back maybe. But from the parent's view, it's just hard. It's so hard.
We did get one more question, and Drew, I would say this one is probably for you. It says, my son was in the process of getting his evaluation prior to school shutting down. What are the new timelines when school resumes? I was told they could not finish the evaluation remotely.
Did you say it was for me?
I would think so, yeah.
Yeah, the general rule is 60 days excluding summer. So there's this Act 13 that's sort of, this Pennsylvania statute does not explicitly get rid of those timelines. So technically, I would say there's an argument, that's where you're really in an argument situation where there's not case law on it yet. You have an argument that they violated the mandates of the federal statute. They didn't do it within 60 days excluding summer. But this Act 13 does state that they can make a good faith effort to provide a continuity of education. And that's going to be an argument. Ultimately, it's going to come down to, well, what wasn't done? You know, if you're talking about surveys that could be mailed or sent online, I think that they're going to be hard pressed to say we couldn't do that. You're talking about observations or an IQ test or something like that. They're going to have an argument. The real question about, you know, whether there's a 60-day violation or whether there's an exception for COVID or not is probably going to come down to that. Was it at all feasibly possible to do it? And then second, was there or was there not a substantive denial of educational rights? And not to get too complex on this, but you know, typically during a school year, if a district misses the timeline, not only do I have to argue, yeah, you violated the timeline technically, but also it actually causes substantive harm to the child educational. They're probably going to have an argument to say, no harm, no foul, because even though we missed the 60 days, nobody was really, you know, there was like a month where no one was being educated, and then some districts, you know, came back and some didn't at all. And it's going to be those interwinding sets of facts of how little education did everyone else get while your kid was being uneducated, even if there was a technical violation of the 60 days. Sorry, I made it more complicated than I needed to make it. Sorry.
Well, yeah, COVID has definitely complicated everything, hasn't it? Yeah, but what would your recommendation be? Like, should she maybe reach out to the special education director just to say, like, what is the new timeline now that, you know?
Yes, I think that needs to be put in an email, ask what the new timeline is. And also ask, I probably would want to have that evaluation report reviewed. A lot of times, it used to be a law many years ago, they'd have evaluation report meetings to have them reviewed. I'd want that meeting reviewed. And then you'll get a feel when they explain the data to you, did this gap cause a harm that otherwise wouldn't have happened if they could have done it anyway?
Right. All right. Well, I definitely want to thank all of our panelists. I think that you all created such a great wide scope of understanding, you know, this process, really seeing it from all of these different perspectives. I think really helps families. I would encourage families to reach out if they have, you know, additional questions. And again, thank you so much for giving your time and all the great information. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
All right.